Welcome to Mr. R's art class. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Thumbs, subs, and ring that bell. So in this video, we're going to be doing a grid transfer. We're going to work with a printout that has some basic geometric shapes. And then on the right-hand side, this is what your final draft should look like once we start using some primary colors, so red, yellow, and blue. This is also going to be experimenting and exploring what those primary colors look like once you make secondary colors and we start overlapping those secondary colors with some primary colors. So let's go ahead and get started. So first thing you need to do is grab a ruler. And we're going to make a 1/2 inch frame first here on the left hand side. So line up that first black mark on your ruler. That first black mark is 0. 0 needs to be lined up with the left hand side of your paper. And we're going to make a mark at a 1/2 inch here. So we have, so in an inch, there's 1 inch there. So in an inch we have 3 medium sized marks. So we have 1 medium sized mark, second medium sized mark, and then the third medium sized mark. So we're just looking at those medium-sized marks. You have some really smaller marks here. We're just looking at that second medium-sized mark, and that's going to be a 1/2 inch. So another way is that you could find your 1 inch and try to find somewhere where the middle of 1 inch is, and that'll be that second medium-sized mark. Okay. Then you could scoot your ruler. So 0 should be lined up with that mark that we just made there, and you're going to make a mark at every inch. Every inch. So the big line next to each number, that's an inch mark. The big line next to each number is an inch mark. So by the time you get to 8, you should be at the end of your paper. Then you're going to slide your ruler to the top, and you're going to do the same thing up here. Make sure that 0, that first black line, is lined up with the left hand side of your paper. And you're going to make a mark at a 1/2 inch. So that second medium sized mark there, that second medium sized mark. Or you could find the 1 inch and try to cut that 1 inch in half, and you'll find your second mark there. That's a 1/2 inch there. You're going to slide your ruler over. You're going to scoot your ruler over. Line up that 0 on your ruler with that mark that we just made. So 0, that first black line should be lined up with that mark. And you're going to make a mark at every inch. Every inch. So the big line next to each number is an inch mark. The big line next to each number is an inch mark. By the time you get to 8, you should be at the end of your paper. Then you can go ahead and connect those marks. You want to connect these marks lightly. I'll be drawing them dark just so you're able to see them. So line up your marks. Make sure your marks are lined up first. Then you draw and connect your marks. You want to draw them lightly, just in case your ruler goes a bit off or your pencil kind of slides off there. So you should have that 1/2 inch mark on the left, then these 1 inch frames that go all the way to the top. So what you want to do now is you want to rotate your paper so that your frame's on top. That frame that we just made is going to be on top. So you should have a smaller frame on the top of your piece of paper. And we're going to make a frame at the bottom of this 1/2 sheet of paper. So 0 needs to be lined up with the left hand side of your paper. 0, that first black mark, needs to be lined up with the left hand side of your paper. And we're making another 1/2 inch mark. So again, that 1/2 inch mark is that second medium sized mark. So we have 1 medium sized mark, 2 medium sized mark, and 3 medium sized marks within an inch. So that second medium sized mark. Then we're scooting our ruler over. 0 should be lined up with that 1/2 inch mark here. 0 is that first black line. And you're making a mark at every inch. And the 1 inch marks are the big lines next to each number. Then you're going to slide your ruler up. Do the same thing up here. You can put your ruler under that frame that we have on top. And 0 should be lined up with the left hand side. You're making a mark at a 1/2 inch. 1/2 inch is that second medium sized mark there. Scooting your 0 over. 0 should be lined up with that 1/2 inch mark. Make a mark at every inch. So the inch marks are the big lines next to each number. So find the numbers, find the big mark, and then you're going to go ahead and connect these marks as well. So again, make sure that your marks are lined up with the ruler. And go from one side of the paper all the way to the other side of the paper. Go from one side of the paper all the way to the other side of the paper. Don't start at the frame and then go all the way to the end. You want to go all the way from one side of the paper all the way to the other side of the paper. And so what you're going to end up is with a grid that's similar to this printout here. So this printout has a grid on it. It's really light. You can see it there. And so you're going to have a square on this bottom left-hand corner. And so you could draw an X inside that square. And what I normally do is I put the ABCs here on the left-hand side. So starting from the X outward, we're going to start with the ABCs. And then on this small sheet of paper here, you have the same marks here. They're really light. You can do the same thing. So starting from the X outward, I'm going to put the ABCs. Then on the bottom frame, I'm going to put some numbers here. So same thing down here. So what you're going to do is you're going to transfer everything that's inside of these squares from this printout onto this blank sheet of paper, or what used to be a blank sheet of paper that we now have a grid on top of. So you're going to look at all the details that are inside of these squares here, and you're going to transfer all those details that are inside those squares into these squares here. So you're going to look at this first square here, and you're going to take all the details that are inside that square and you're going to transfer them over to this piece of paper here. So inside of A1, so this is A and then 1, so A and 1, this would be A1. So all those details inside of A1, you would transfer them over to this blank box here. So you're going to work on one square at a time. This is going to help you concentrate on one square at a time. This is also going to help you practice how to draw something without tracing at all. So you could use a ruler for some of these straighter edges here. So you have 5 different shapes. You have 1 circle, 1 square, 1 triangle, and then 2 rectangles here. So you need to be able to transfer those 5 shapes from this printout onto this grid. So let's start out with this circle and this square. So let's maybe find this square here to kind of get us started out. So inside of C2, so here's C, and then here's 2. So if I go over to the left, 1, 2, this would be C2. So C2, that's where that square is. So we need to find C2 on this grid that we made. So here's C, 1, 2. So here's C2. So this is where that square is. I'll make it a little bit darker than some of the other squares here, than the grid itself, just to show you where it's at. And then for the circle, the left side of the circle starts here. Then the top of this circle starts at D2. So here's D. And then here's 2. So the top of D2, I have the top of that circle. So at the top of D2 is the top of that circle. So I'm just making these little dots here to kind of create a reference for the edges of my circle. Then the right side of the circle is in C4. So C4. So we need to find C4 on our grid. So here's C, and here's 4. And it only goes a little bit into C4, so we don't need to go too far. And it definitely doesn't take up half of this square here, so it's a little bit smaller than half of C4. Then the bottom of this circle is at A2, so we need to find A2. So here's A, and here's 2. And so this kind of gives us an idea of where our circle's at. So we really only need to get 4 of these parts here, and then we could kind of connect these edges and these dots to create a circle. And we could draw it really lightly. And then as we pass from D2 to D3, there's just a small part of that circle there. And then it looks like this part, this ring of the circle, goes right through this intersection between C and D. Between C and D line. That's where this intersects here. That's where this Circle goes right through this point between C and D and 3 and 4. So we need to find C and D and 3 and 4. And so by the time we get over here, we should be at this intersection. So by the time we get over here, we should be at this intersection. And then here's our point here. So we're going to connect that. And then this circle drops down, but it doesn't hit this intersection down here. It's just to the right of that. And it passes through B4, 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 goes into B3, at the bottom of B3, into A3, and then we're getting close to that intersection there, so we need to start curving a little bit more. And then we have A1 here, but it doesn't meet up at that intersection between A1 and A2. It goes a little bit to the left of that. And then once we get between B and C, and B1 and C1, it goes right past there. Alright, so then I could probably curve maybe this a little bit more just to match up with this grid. And again, this is just to help you practice drawing shapes or drawing anything without tracing at all. So we have a rough circle here, a square, then we could find these other shapes as well. So start out with that circle, start out with that square, then go ahead and draw these other shapes in as well. If you need to erase, go ahead and erase to help kind of clean up some of these shapes. So when you get done transferring everything from the printout image, your grid transfer should look something like this. While you're transferring some of these shapes from the printout, you should be looking for some of these hints and clues. So for example, this bottom right hand corner of the triangle should match up with the right side of this rectangle here. So while you're transferring some of these shapes, make sure that you're looking for some of those hints and some of those clues there. So for example, this top left hand corner of this bottom rectangle is matched up with the middle of this square. So when you're drawing your square and when you're drawing your rectangle, you're looking for those types of hints, those types of clues to help you draw and transfer some of your shapes a little bit more accurately. So once you get done transferring those shapes over, we're going to go over these shapes on this grid transfer with a permanent marker. Once we go over with a permanent marker, we're going to get rid of this whole grid here. So we're going to erase this whole grid with a permanent marker. So first we're going to go over all these shapes with a permanent marker. So we're going to go over the circle with the permanent marker. We're going to go over the square and the rectangles. So you want to try to draw this circle as best as possible. You could use a ruler for the other shapes if you like. So you would just go over all these shapes here with a permanent marker. Okay, so once you've gone over all your shapes with a permanent marker, you're going to grab an eraser and you're going to erase this whole grid that goes over all these shapes here. So you're going to grab an eraser, erase all these shapes. Try to do this as slowly as possible, because what happens is if you start trying to erase too quickly, then you might rip your paper. So once you get done erasing your grid, it should look something like this. Make sure that when you are drawing your grid that you draw your lines a lot lighter. Some of my lines you can still kind of see because I drew them a lot darker, so you're able to see here on the camera. I'm okay with you keeping the frame here. I'm okay with you keeping these coordinates here on the sides. You don't have to get rid of that. If you get too close to some of these edges, sometimes you could kind of crinkle and mess up your paper. So I'm okay with you keeping this frame. Just make sure when you're erasing, you do it really slowly, just because I don't want you to mess up your paper. So the reason why we went over this with permanent marker is because we're going to paint in some of these shapes here. So we're going to paint them in using primary colors, red, yellow, and blue. So the first three shapes that we're going to paint is going to be this square, this triangle, and this rectangle. So you could pick red, yellow, or blue. And you could paint the triangle red, yellow, blue, you could paint the square red, yellow, blue, and you could paint the rectangle red, yellow, blue. But you can't use the same color twice. So this has to be one color, the triangle has to be a separate color, and then this big rectangle has to be the third and last color. So you're going to pick red, yellow, or blue, and you're going to paint in the square here, this triangle, and then this rectangle here. So you're going to paint those three shapes in first. So this is everything that you're going to need. And so we're going to go ahead and pick two different size brushes. You could get a medium sized brush and a really small brush. You're going to need that smaller brush to kind of help you with some of these corners for some of these shapes. So again, we're going to paint this whole triangle here, even though it goes into this circle and even though it overlaps with this other second rectangle here. So we're going to paint this whole triangle here. You're going to paint this square, and lastly you're going to paint this rectangle here as well, even though it overlaps with this circle and that second rectangle. So again, these are going to be three separate colors. I'm going to go ahead and paint in this rectangle yellow. I'm going to paint the triangle here blue, and then my square red. So once you get it all painted in, this is what it should look like. My square is red, my triangle here is blue, even though it overlaps into the circle and this second rectangle. Then this first rectangle here that we painted yellow, we painted the whole thing, even though it overlaps the circle and the second rectangle. So once the days pass and these shapes have had a chance to actually dry off, you're going to go ahead and combine the colors that you have closest to each other. So on these two shapes, I have blue and yellow. So I'm going to combine my blue and my yellow, and let's see what color that makes. So what you can do is you can actually split some of these colors. So I have blue and yellow that I'm not only going to mix together to paint in this second rectangle, I'm either going to use yellow and blue to combine it with this red to fill in this whole circle here. So you could split some of these colors that you might already have. In this case, I'm going to go ahead and split my yellow and my blue. So there's my blue, and there's my yellow that I'm going to split. So again, the reason why I'm going to split these is because I'm going to combine these two colors together, and I'm also going to combine them with either the red. So first I'm going to combine my yellow and my blue together, and I could actually just put these into one tray. And so this makes a green. And if there's a little bit more yellow in there, it might make a yellow green. And if there's more blue in there, it might make a blue green. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and fill in this whole rectangle, even though it overlaps those other two shapes. So that's why we went over it with permanent marker as well, so you can still see the shape that's underneath. And again, I still have the smaller brush that you could use to kind of help you get inside of some of these corners here. Feel free to rotate the paper. Feel free to load your brush back up. So you can still see some of those lines there from the permanent marker, so that tells me where the rectangle actually ends. Alright, and you can actually still see some of that yellow kind of coming up from that bottom first rectangle. So now we have those two colors mixed together. We're going to go ahead and combine either the red or the yellow or the red and the blue. So for the circle, I'm going to go with the red and the blue. Even though it overlaps this yellow, even though it overlaps this square, and even though it's going to overlap this bottom part of this triangle here, I'm going to overlap both of these, or all of these shapes here, with the red and the blue. So let's go ahead and combine those two colors. I'm going to get the red and throw it into the blue, and it's going to make a violet. Okay, so here we go. So you're going to see some of that blue showing through for the triangle there. You might still see some of that square showing through. So the reason why we're doing this is because I want to see how some of these colors react with each other when they're overlapped. So if you do this thin enough, you could actually get some other colors that are created when you see the red showing through this purple or this violet that we made. So we're just trying to see how some of these colors react, what other new colors that are created when we're overlapping these colors, and that's why we did this. That's why we let the yellow dry and the blue dry, so that they're still there and they still have a chance to combine with these other layers of new color that we're combining here. And once it's all dried up, I went ahead and put this on the tracer so you can actually see how some of these colors mix once they're overlapped with each other. So the reason why we did this, the reason why we experimented and explored with these different colors, so is that you could see how these primary colors and these secondaries react to each other. So we started out with red, yellow, and blue, which are primary colors. Over here we have an example of a secondary color, which is green, and then we have another example of a secondary color, which is purple. And then once you start combining secondary colors and primary colors, so once you start combining purple and blue, then you start getting these tertiary colors. So you have blue violet, which is an example of a tertiary color, or you have red violet, which is an example of a tertiary color. And then you have these other tertiary colors here as well, where you have a blue green, and which would be that turquoise color, and then you have that yellow green, which is also an example of a tertiary color. So again, the reason why we did this is so that you could see how these colors react to each other, and that you're experimenting, you're exploring how to make primary colors, secondary colors, and tertiary colors. So if you have any questions of how to mix some of these colors together or how to make the grid, go ahead and let me know. Thank you for watching the video. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. And feel free to watch any of the other related videos.